You're 19 years old. You've had 6 weeks of training. The soldier next to you is praying to the Emperor, his lips moving soundlessly through litanies you've both memorized without understanding. The one on your left is sobbing, not even trying to hide it anymore because shame requires the luxury of a future, and none of you are certain you have one. Across 300 meters of scorched earth, something is aiming at you with technology your great-great-grandchildren won't understand, assuming you live long enough to have children at all. You have a lasgun that your grandfather might have carried, a flak vest that might stop shrapnel if you're lucky, and orders to advance when the whistle blows. Welcome to infantry war in the 41st millennium. Welcome to the mathematics of modern warfare. Welcome to the moment where you discover that courage and faith and training mean absolutely nothing against superior firepower and 3 centuries of technological advantage. This is the reality they don't show in the propaganda reels. This is what happens when the Imperium's sledgehammer meets the Tau Empire's scalpel. This is the ground-level truth of warfare between humanity's most expendable soldiers and the galaxy's most sophisticated infantry. The Imperial Guard versus Tau Fire Warriors, mass versus precision, faith versus reason, 10,000 years of stagnation versus 300 years of relentless innovation. The outcome isn't predetermined by doctrine or technology. It's written in blood, measured in seconds, calculated in casualty ratios that would horrify anyone with functioning conscience, and forgotten by everyone except those who survive it. Your name is Mikhail Torvus, though in 6 hours that name will matter to no one except the Administratum clerk who'll mark you as combat loss number 4217 in the 3rd Battle of Agrellan. You were born on an agri-world whose name you can barely pronounce, in Low Gothic, 3rd. Son of a farmer who grew obscure grains for tithe shipments he never understood the purpose of. Your childhood was dirt and labor, and the endless sky of a world where nothing ever changed and nothing ever would. Then the Imperium came collecting its blood tithe, and you were selected because you were young and healthy and completely expendable, taken from everything you knew, and thrown into a war machine that processed humans with the same efficiency it processed ammunition. 6 weeks of training on a world you never learned the name of. Learning to march in formation, to maintain your lasgun, to fix a bayonet, to dig a trench, to recite prayers to an emperor 10,000 years dead, who you're assured is somehow still protecting you, despite the evidence suggesting otherwise. Learning to follow orders without question because questioning gets you shot by the commissar, and obedience might get you killed by the enemy, but at least death in combat counts as honorable. Learning that your life has exactly as much value as the Imperium assigns it, which is to say slightly less than the lasgun you're issued, and considerably less than the rations that feed you. You landed on Agrellan 3 weeks ago with 12,000 other guardsmen from 6 different regiments speaking 4 different languages and worshipping the Emperor in dozens of different ways that all amounted to the same desperate hope that faith would somehow deflect bullets. The world was already burning when you arrived, its cities reduced to rubble by orbital bombardment, its population evacuated or dead, or caught somewhere between the Imperium that claimed them and the Tau Empire that promised liberation. You were told this was a strategic world, that holding it mattered for reasons beyond your comprehension and pay grade. You were told the Emperor protects. You were told that courage and faith would see you through. You were told many things, and you believed them, because believing was easier than confronting the alternative. 300 meters away, across ground that's been cleared of cover and pre-sighted for overlapping fields of fire, Fire Warrior Shazla Tau Viola she checks his pulse rifle for the 17th time this hour. The weapon is a masterwork of technology that would take Imperial tech priests decades to understand and millennia to reproduce, assuming they didn't declare it heretical and destroy it first. It fires superheated plasma projectiles with accuracy that's computer-assisted and range that exceeds your lasgun by 50%. The combat armor he wears integrates shield generators, communications systems, enhanced optics, and materials science that the Imperium lost during the Dark Age of technology and never recovered. She is 23 years old, by Imperial reckoning, which makes him ancient by Fire Warrior standards, where most don't survive their first 5 years of combat. He was selected for the Fire Caste as a child, his aptitudes identified by tests that measured things the Imperium doesn't believe in, like individual potential and optimal role assignment. His training lasted years, not weeks, covering everything from marksmanship to first aid to tactical analysis to the philosophical principles of the greater good that supposedly justifies the killing he's about to do. He's never visited Earth, never heard of your homeworld, doesn't know your name or care about your gods. To him, you're not a person but a target, not an individual but a statistic in the casualty projections his commander reviewed during the pre-battle briefing. The asymmetry is absolute, and it goes both directions. One Tau fire warrior costs the Tau Empire what 1,000 Imperial Guardsmen cost the Imperium in training, equipment, and strategic value. The Imperium can replace those 1,000. The Tau Empire cannot easily replace their one. This creates opposing doctrines that are both rational and horrifying, depending on which side of the equation you're standing on. Imperial Guard doctrine says, victory through attrition, through being willing to spend lives until the enemy runs out of ammunition or will or bodies to shoot. Tau doctrine says victory through efficiency, through superior range and firepower and force multiplication that minimizes friendly casualties while maximizing enemy losses. You're comparing a scalpel to a sledgehammer. The question isn't which is better. The question is what happens when they collide, what it feels like to be the steel being hammered or the flesh being cut, whether dying efficiently or dying as part of a mass wave assault actually makes any difference to the person doing the dying. The battlefield is Factory Complex Sigma-7, an industrial site that processed minerals you've never heard of using techniques you couldn't comprehend. It was valuable once, before the war, back when this world had an economy and a population and a future. Now it's just terrain, just positions, marked on tactical maps. Just ground that needs to be held because orders say it needs to be held, and orders are all that matter in a galaxy where questioning them gets you executed. The Imperium dug in here 3 weeks ago, 12,000 guardsmen turning the ruins into a defensive position that doctrine has refined over 10,000 years of warfare. Trenches in precise patterns, razor wire obstacles, minefields mapped and marked, artillery positions pre-sighted for every approach, overlapping fields of fire calculated to create kill zones where nothing could advance without dying. The Cadian veterans supervised the construction, their experience evident in details that the conscripts wouldn't think of and the local PDF didn't know to include. The result is a fortress of dirt and desperation, strong enough to hold against conventional assault, questionable against an enemy whose conventional is 3 centuries more advanced than yours. The Tau have been probing the defenses for 2 days, their reconnaissance drones mapping every position with sensors that see in spectrums you don't have names for. They know exactly where you are, exactly how many of you there are, exactly what weapons you have and what fields of fire you command. Their commander has analyzed the defenses with AI assistance. That's identified 17 potential weak points and calculated the optimal approach vectors and estimated casualties with precision that would shock Imperial officers who consider battle planning an art form rather than a science. You don't know any of this. You know that you're cold despite the desert heat because your body is trying to prepare for trauma it instinctively knows is coming. You know that your hands are shaking despite your attempts to control them, making it difficult to hold your lasgun steady. You know that the man praying next to you is named Davos and he's from the same agri-world and you used to play together as children, back when playing was something that existed in your world. You know that the man sobbing on your left is named something you never learned because he joined your squad 2 days ago as a replacement for the previous soldier who died from infected wounds after standing on a piece of rebar in the ruins. You know that at 0600 hours the Tau will attack because your sergeant told you this with the certainty of someone reading from intelligence reports he doesn't understand. You know that some of you will die because that's what happens in battles, though your training never quite explained the mechanics of how lasgun fire kills or what it feels like when superheated plasma punches through your flak armor and flash boils the moisture in your tissues. You know that the Emperor protects because you've been told this 10,000 times. though the evidence for his protection is notably absent from the mass graves you helped dig yesterday for soldiers who presumably also believed in divine intervention. What you don't know, what they very carefully never told you during training, is that Imperial Guard doctrine on worlds facing Tau incursion has calculated that acceptable casualty ratios run between 60 and 70%, that for every 3 guardsmen who go into battle against fire warriors, 2 won't come back, that your life expectancy once combat begins is measured in minutes if you're unlucky and hours if fortune somehow favors you, that the strategic calculation has already written you off as an acceptable loss in exchange for holding this position long enough for reinforcements that may or may not actually be coming. Across that 300 meters of killing ground, she doesn't know your name or your story, or that you have a family on a world so far away that light from your sun won't reach here for decades. He knows his mission parameters, his rules of engagement, his assigned fire lanes and fallback positions. He knows that the greater good requires this world be brought into the Tau Empire's embrace, that the humans here deserve liberation from the Imperium's oppression, that his killing you is actually a mercy, because it frees you from a life of servitude to a dead god and a dying empire. He believes this, the same way you believe the Emperor protects, the same way both of you believe that your causes are righteous, and your violence is justified, and the people you're about to kill somehow deserve it, or at least their deaths serve some higher purpose that makes the act of killing them acceptable. Neither of you is right. Neither of you is wrong. You're both just soldiers, following orders in a war that neither of you started, and neither of you can stop, trapped by doctrines and ideologies, and the simple momentum of military organizations that process humans into casualties with industrial efficiency. The chrono ticks towards 0600. The sky is beginning to lighten with the pale gray of pre-dawn, though on a Grellan dawn brings heat that will hit 50 degrees Celsius by mid-morning and make your flak armor feel like you're wearing an oven. Your mouth is dry despite drinking from your canteen, fear triggering physiological responses that your training never quite managed to suppress. Your heart is hammering against your ribs hard enough that you wonder if the Tau sensors can detect it, if your terror is somehow visible to their advanced technology. The whistle will blow in 6 minutes. The battle will begin, and everything you thought you understood about courage and war and yourself will be tested against a reality that doctrine can describe but never quite prepare you for. This is what it means to be Imperial Guard infantry facing Tau fire warriors. This is the moment before the storm, the silence before the screaming, the last few seconds of life before it becomes survival, or death, or something worse that exists in the space between. This is the ground truth of 41st Millennium warfare, stripped of propaganda and glory and anything that might make it bearable to contemplate. Welcome to the front line. The mathematics are about to assert themselves. 0600 hours arrives with the precision of orbital mechanics and the inevitability of entropy. The first indication that the battle has started comes not from your front lines but from behind you, as the earth erupts in geysers of superheated soil and vaporized rock. The sound follows seconds later, a crack like reality splitting, the hypersonic report of railgun rounds that traveled faster than sound and arrived before your ears could register the threat. Tau hammerhead gunships, firing from positions 2 kilometers away, so far distant that your lasguns couldn't touch them if you could even see them, which you can't because they're hull down behind ruins that give them perfect defilade while exposing you to their targeting solutions. Your trench doesn't save you. It was designed to protect against direct fire from ground level, not plunging fire from elevated positions that the Tau selected specifically because they negate your defensive advantages. The guardsman 3 positions to your right simply ceases to exist, his body vaporized by kinetic energy that would shame most orbital strikes. The trench wall behind him, glass smooth, where the heat flash turned sand into fused silica. The man who was praying stops mid-word, his head disappearing in a pink mist, his body collapsing forward with mechanical precision as if someone simply switched him off. You're screaming, but you can't hear it over the sound of your own blood rushing through your ears and the continued thundering of railgun fire that's systematically deconstructing your defensive line with the methodical patience of artillery crew working from a target list. The Cadian sergeant is yelling orders, his voice barely audible, something about dispersal and counter-battery fire, but the words don't matter because there's nowhere to disperse to, and your artillery is firing blind at coordinates that are already obsolete because Tau doctrine emphasizes shoot and scoot, and by the time your shells land the hammerheads will be in entirely different positions. 30 seconds into the battle, and you've lost 3 men from your squad without ever seeing the enemy. This is the Tau way of war, killing from beyond your ability to respond, using technology to create engagement ranges, where combat becomes a one-sided execution rather than a fight. Your training covered this in theory, dry lectures about standoff warfare and the importance of closing distance. But theory doesn't capture the visceral helplessness of dying to weapons you can't see, can't reach, can't even comprehend. The artillery barrage lasts 15 minutes, though your perception of time has become unreliable, seconds stretching into eternities while minutes compress into instants. When it finally stops, the sudden silence is almost worse than the noise you're hearing. Damaged enough that the world sounds like you're underwater, everything muffled and distant. You risk looking over the trench lip and immediately understand why the Tau stopped shooting. They don't need artillery anymore. They have something worse. The drones come first, 200 of them sweeping forward in a wave that moves with unnatural coordination, each unit linked to every other through networked intelligence that shares targeting data and tactical analysis in real time. Gun drones, their twin pulse carbines already tracking toward your position, flying low and fast enough that they're difficult targets but high enough that they have clear lines of fire over your defensive obstacles. They're not trying to kill you, not primarily. They're programmed for suppression and reconnaissance, forcing you to reveal your positions by shooting at them while painting those positions for the fire warriors advancing behind them. The order comes down the line, passed from sergeant to corporal to you. The doctrine that the Imperial Guard has refined through countless battles against technologically superior foes: mass fire, volume over precision. If you can't aim well enough to hit a fast-moving target, put enough bullets in the air that the target hits itself. Your lasgun comes up, your hands steadier now because you're too busy to be afraid. Muscle memory from 6 weeks of training taking over because your conscious mind has essentially shut down, unable to process the sensory overload of modern combat. You fire. The last bolt crosses the distance at light speed, missing the drone you aimed at by meters because you didn't lead the target properly and your rifle sights aren't designed for aerial targets. You fire again. Miss again. Third shot connects, your last bolt intersecting with the drone's flight path more through probability than skill. The ruby beam punching through the antigrav unit and sending the machine tumbling to earth, trailing sparks and components. All along the line, thousands of guardsmen are doing the same thing, creating a curtain of fire that starts downing drones with statistical inevitability. 30 drones fall in the first minute, 60 more in the second, the survivors adapting their flight patterns in real time, but ultimately unable to overcome the simple mathematics of volume fire. The Imperial Guard is very good at one thing, and that one thing is putting enormous amounts of firepower downrange without much concern for accuracy or ammunition conservation. But every shot you fire illuminates your position, your muzzle flash visible to sensors that operate in spectrums beyond human perception, painting you for death with each trigger pull. The Tau knew you would shoot at the drones. They planned for it. The drones were never meant to win this engagement. They were meant to make you reveal yourselves so the real killers could find you. The fire warriors open fire at 200 meters, the maximum effective range of their pulse rifles, which is a full 100 meters beyond where your lasgun becomes more prayer than weapon. You see them now, shapes moving through the smoke and dust, their armor making them look larger than human, more solid, more dangerous. The first volley is disciplined, each fire warrior selecting targets according to doctrine, no wasted shots, no panic fire, just professional soldiers applying their trade with workmanlike efficiency. The guardsman next to you, Davos, who you played with as children, takes a pulse round through the chest. The superheated plasma doesn't just penetrate his flak armor, it vaporizes it, punching through the protective plates like they're not there, and flash boiling the moisture in his tissues. His chest cavity explodes outward. ribs and organs and fluids spraying in a cone behind him, his body folding around the wound like paper around fire. He doesn't scream. There isn't time. His nervous system stops sending signals before his brain can process the damage. He's dead before he hits the ground, and you're grateful for that because the alternative would be worse. You return fire, but your lasgun is out of range, your shots splashing uselessly against Tau shield generators, or missing entirely as you try to aim at targets that are professional soldiers using cover and movement, while you're a conscript standing in a trench, hoping faith will deflect plasma. The asymmetry is absolute. They can kill you and you can't kill them. Not at this range, not with these weapons, not unless they make mistakes, and fire warriors are trained specifically not to make mistakes. The mathematical reality of modern warfare is asserting itself with brutal clarity. For every guardsman killed, the Imperials are downing perhaps one drone, maybe one fire warrior, if luck favors them. The casualty ratio is catastrophic, unsustainable, would break any military that wasn't the Imperial Guard, where catastrophic casualty ratios are just Tuesday and commanders. Plan operations, assuming 70% losses, and call it acceptable. Then the commissar's voice cuts through the chaos, amplified by his voxcaster, carrying the absolute authority of someone who represents the Emperor's will and has the right to execute anyone who disobeys. Fix bayonets. For the Emperor. Charge. And you understand with sick certainty that command has decided the only way to close the range gap is to cross it, to charge into that killing ground, and either reach the Tau lines where your bayonets become effective, or die trying, and command doesn't particularly care which outcome occurs so long as you follow orders. Your hands move without conscious thought, attaching the bayonet to your lasgun's lugs with the mechanical precision drilled into you during training. All along the line, 500 guardsmen are doing the same thing, preparing to charge into overlapping fields of fire against an enemy that has been training for exactly this scenario, that has doctrine specifically designed to counter human wave assaults, that has weapons optimized for creating maximum casualties during mass advances. The whistle blows, you go over the top, and the real killing begins. Running across open ground under fire is not like anything your training prepared you for. Cannot be simulated or explained or really understood until you're doing it. The ground is treacherous, pocked with shell craters and studded with debris that catches your boots and threatens to send you sprawling. Your flak armor weighs you down, the plates that might stop shrapnel also making you slower, more cumbersome, easier to target. Your lasgun feels simultaneously too heavy and too light, its weight throwing off your balance while providing no real protection against the plasma fire that's crisscrossing the killing ground like lethal rainfall. You're screaming. Everyone is screaming. War cries and prayers and curses and simple wordless terror given voice because the human animal needs to make sound when confronting death, needs to assert its existence against the void that's reaching for it. The sound is enormous, 500 men roaring their defiance or their fear, the noise almost enough to drown out the weapon's fire, almost enough to pretend that the world isn't trying to kill you with industrial efficiency. The first 50 meters cost you 300 men. You watch them die in your peripheral vision. Bodies stumbling and falling, some silent, some shrieking, all of them going down and not getting back up. The Tau fire is disciplined, controlled, each burst carefully aimed, no ammunition wasted on targets already down. They're not shooting to scare you or suppress you, they're shooting to kill you, and they're very good at it. A pulse round misses your head by centimeters, close enough that you feel the heat wash, smell the ozone tang of superheated atmosphere. The near miss saves your life in a perverse way because it makes you stumble, throwing off your stride, causing the next shot that was tracking your center mass to miss low and strike the guardsman behind you instead. You don't see him fall, but you hear it. The wet thud of body hitting ground. The abbreviated scream, cut short by impact. 70 meters. Half your number are down. The Tau haven't lost a single fire warrior yet because you're not close enough to threaten them, not at these ranges where their pulse rifles outperform your lasguns by every metric that matters. You're running into a one-sided slaughter, charging toward an enemy that's killing you with the calm efficiency of workers processing materials on an assembly line. 80 meters. 150 men left. You can see the Tau clearly now, see their armor and weapons, see the way they move with practiced coordination, each fire warrior covering their bond brother, their positioning creating interlocking fields of fire that turn the approach into a maze of death. They're not panicking, not breaking, not even particularly hurried. They're just shooting, reloading, shooting again, methodical as a metronome, professional as executioners. The guardsman to your left takes a pulse round through the knee, the joint exploding in a spray of flash-boiled fluids and shattered bone. He goes down screaming, and you can't stop to help because stopping means dying, means becoming a static target, means giving the Tau time to aim properly instead of shooting at moving targets. You leave him behind because you have to, because that's what warfare means, because saving your friend would kill you both and accomplish nothing except adding 2 bodies to the pile instead of 1. 90 meters. 75 men remaining. The mathematics are brutal and unyielding. You're losing 85% of your force, crossing 300 meters of open ground, and the only reason it's not 100% is because the Tau have finite rates of fire and you're presenting more targets than they can service efficiently. You're surviving not through skill or courage or divine protection, but through simple probability, through being one of the lucky ones who doesn't happen to be in the path of a pulse round in any given second. 100 meters. The tide shifts, not dramatically, but noticeably, because you're finally entering effective range for your lasguns. Your weapon comes up, your fingers squeezing the trigger while you're still running, firing from the hip because there's no time to aim and stopping to take proper shooting stance would make you dead. Your last bolt crosses the distance and strikes a fire warrior's armor, splashing against his shield generator, doing no damage but announcing that the Imperials are finally dangerous, that the prey has reached range where it can bite back. All along the surviving portion of the charge, guardsmen are firing now, ruby beams lancing out toward the Tau lines. The volume of fire does what precision cannot. Overwhelming shield generators, through simple saturation. Last bolts penetrating when the generators fail to recharge between hits. A fire warrior goes down, your first enemy casualty of the battle, shot through the helmet by a last bolt that punched through failed shielding. Then another falls, and another, the casualty rate shifting from completely one-sided to merely catastrophically disadvantageous. But you're also dying faster now because you're closer, because the Tau are switching from aimed fire to rapid fire, accepting reduced accuracy in exchange for increased volume, because their doctrine recognizes this is the critical moment where massed assault either breaks through or breaks apart. Pulse rifles are chattering on full automatic, each burst sending 3 rounds downrange. Plasma fire so thick it creates visible distortion in the air from heat wash. 50 men left, 30 meters from the Tau position. Close enough to see individual faces inside their helmets, close enough to read the expressions that are universal across species, close enough to recognize fear and determination, and the same realization you're experiencing that this is the moment where combat becomes personal, where it stops being doctrine and tactics, and becomes murder at intimate range. 20 men, 10 meters. The last sprint, your legs burning from exertion, your lungs screaming for oxygen, your heart hammering so hard it feels like it might rupture. A fire warrior directly ahead of you is trying to fall back, his training telling him to maintain distance, but he's backed into rubble that blocks his retreat. You see the moment he realizes he's trapped, see his stance shift from controlled withdrawal to desperate last stand. 5 meters, your bayonet leading, his pulse rifle coming up, time dilating the way it does in moments of extreme stress, seconds stretching like taffy, giving you time to see everything in crystalline detail, the way his hands grip his weapon, the way his weight shifts as he prepares to fire, the way his eyes widen behind his helmet visor as he realizes you're going to reach him before he can shoot. You collide with him at full sprint, your bayonet punching through the gap between his armor plates, the blade designed for exactly this purpose, sliding between protection to find the vulnerable flesh beneath. The impact drives you both to the ground, your weight and momentum and desperation carrying you down on top of him. The blade goes deep, you feel it part tissue and scrape bone, feel the terrible resistance of a body that doesn't want to die fighting against steel that has no preference either way. His eyes are violet, you notice absurdly, a color you've never seen in human irises. He's making a sound, a high-pitched keen that might be pain or shock, or simply the noise that escapes when your diaphragm is punctured and air is rushing out through holes it shouldn't be exiting through. His hands come up, not attacking but grasping, closing around your wrists, as if he could somehow push you away, push the blade out, undo what's already done. You're screaming too. You realize, not words, just sound, raw terror and adrenaline, and the horrible recognition that you're killing someone. Not shooting at distant target but murdering a person whose eyes you can see and whose breath you can smell and whose death you're causing with your own hands. Your training never prepared you for this intimacy, this terrible closeness to the act of taking life. He dies. Not instantly, not cleanly, but with the messy reality of biological systems shutting down through trauma. His grip on your wrists weakens, his eyes lose focus, his breathing becomes gurgling wetness as blood fills spaces meant for air. You pull your bayonet free and he shudders, one final full-body convulsion, and then goes still in the way that only the dead go still, the absolute limpness that no living body can simulate. You're kneeling over a corpse, your hands shaking, your mind trying to process what you've just done while simultaneously trying not to process it, because processing it would mean confronting the full weight of having ended a life, and that weight might crush you. The battle is still raging around you. Close quarters chaos, where guardsmen and fire warriors are killing each other at point-blank range, where doctrine has dissolved into survival, and survival is just about who's faster and luckier and more willing to do terrible things. A pulse rifle discharged to your left, so close the heat wash singes the hair on your arm. The guardsman who was beside you during the charge takes 3 rounds through the torso, his flak armor no defense at this range, his body literally coming apart from kinetic shock and thermal damage. He's dead before his corpse finishes falling, and the fire warrior who killed him is already tracking toward you, his weapon swinging to acquire the next target. You shoot first, not because you're faster or better trained, but because your lasgun is already in your hands, while he's still turning. Your last bolt catches him in the throat, the one spot where his armor doesn't provide coverage, where the seal between helmet and chest plate leaves vulnerable flesh exposed. The beam burns through skin and cauterizes as it goes, flash cooking tissue, and he goes down clutching at his neck, trying to stop bleeding. That isn't actually bleeding because the wound is already cauterized. But his body doesn't understand that, and his hands are scrabbling anyway in the universal gesture of dying things, trying to hold life. You don't watch him die. You're already moving, survival instinct, overriding conscious thought, your body operating on adrenaline and training and simple animal desperation. The close combat zone is a nightmare of confused fighting. Impossible to tell friend from foe until you're close enough to recognize armor patterns, too chaotic for coherent tactics, just dozens of individual fights happening simultaneously in a space too small to contain them all. A fire warrior appears from behind rubble, his pulse rifle tracking toward you. You don't have time to aim, just point your lasgun in approximately his direction and fire, sending a burst of lasbolts that miss, connect, miss, connect. He staggers, his armor holding but the impacts throwing off his aim, his shot going wide. You close the distance, smash your rifle butt into his helmet, feel something crack that might be his visor or your rifle or both. He goes down, and you bayonet him. Not because you want to, but because that's what close combat means, because mercy is a luxury and hesitation is death. The fighting lasts 17 minutes that feel like 17 hours, close quarters brutality where every second is a lifetime, and every decision is life or death. The Tau are better trained, better equipped, but the guardsmen excel here, in this ugly, intimate violence, where technology matters less than desperation, and where superior range provides no advantage at 2 meters. Bayonets and knives and rifle butts and sometimes just bare hands, soldiers reduced to animals fighting over territory that means nothing and costs everything. When it's over, when the last fire warrior falls back and the last guardsman collapses from exhaustion or wounds, you're standing in the Tau position surrounded by bodies, yours, theirs, no longer distinguishable as human or Xenos, just meat in different colored uniforms, all equally dead, all equally pointless. 23 guardsmen survived the charge. 23 out of 500. 87 of them are still breathing but won't be by nightfall, lying in no man's land with wounds that field medics can't treat and mercy the commissars won't provide. The rest are just dead, scattered across 300 meters, testament to Imperial doctrine that says casualties don't matter if you achieve the objective. You held the Tau advance. You stopped the breakthrough. Command will call it a victory. That assessment will appear in reports filed by officers who weren't there, who didn't watch 500 men die to kill maybe 30 fire warriors and achieve a tactical stalemate that will be forgotten by tomorrow when the next crisis demands attention. Your hands are covered in blood. Some of it is yours, from wounds you haven't noticed yet because you're still running on adrenaline and shock. Most of it belongs to the fire warrior you killed with your bayonet, his violet eyes and gurgling death rattle already burned into your memory where they'll live forever, appearing in dreams and quiet moments for however long you survive. You're alive. That's the only victory that matters. That's the only metric by which soldiers measure success in the moment, regardless of what the tactical maps and strategic assessments might say. You went into the killing ground and came out the other side, and that's more than 477 of your comrades can say, but you're not the same person who went over the top. That Mikhail died somewhere in those 300 meters, shot through the heart by realities that training never conveyed and propaganda carefully concealed. What remains is something different, something that knows what it feels like to kill a person with your own hands, what it sounds like when they die, what their blood smells like when it's hot and fresh and soaking into your uniform. Welcome to infantry combat in the 41st millennium. Welcome to the mathematics of modern warfare. Welcome to the knowledge that courage and faith and duty are just words that High Command uses to convince you to die for objectives you don't understand. Welcome to understanding that you're not a soldier, you're a statistic, a data point in casualty reports, a number that someone will briefly glance at before moving on to the next crisis that requires feeding more bodies into the meat grinder. The battle isn't over. This was just the first day, the opening engagement in a conflict that will last 3 more days and cost thousands more lives and achieve nothing except demonstrating that neither side is willing to retreat and both are willing to spend lives to prove it. You slump against rubble, your lasgun loose in your hands, your body shaking with delayed shock and exhaustion and the beginning recognition of what you've done and seen and become. Around you, the other survivors are doing the same. 23 men who started the day as part of a company and now constitute the entire surviving strength, veterans of a battle that lasted less than an hour and aged them all by decades. The commissar is walking the position, shooting the severely wounded because bullets are cheaper than medical care and mercy killings don't count against his record. You watch him execute 3 men who were begging for help, his bolt pistol administering the Emperor's peace with mechanical efficiency, and you feel nothing because feeling would require having emotions left, and yours have been burned away by the morning's events. 3 more days of this. 3 more days of charging into fire and watching friends die and killing enemies you don't hate and surviving through luck rather than skill. 3 more days of slowly being ground down, your unit shrinking through attrition, your humanity eroding through trauma, your faith tested against evidence that the Emperor either doesn't protect or doesn't care. You survived today. Tomorrow is not guaranteed. That's the only truth. Infantry soldiers learn, the only lesson that matters, the only certainty in a universe of variables. Welcome to war. The real war, not the propaganda version. This is what it actually means to fight for the Imperium against Xenos who claim they're liberating you. This is the ground truth that no training can prepare you for, and no amount of faith can soften. You're alive. For now. That has to be enough because nothing else is promised. Night falls on. A Grellan with the same indifferent certainty as it falls everywhere in the galaxy, darkness covering the killing ground like a shroud, hiding bodies that neither side has bothered to retrieve, because corpse recovery isn't a priority when you're still fighting for survival. The temperature drops from 50 degrees to near freezing, desert extremes that make your teeth chatter and your wounded cry out as cold penetrates damaged tissue and turns manageable pain into agony. You're sitting in what used to be a Tau forward position, now conquered ground held by the 23 survivors of your charge plus reinforcements from the reserve units who moved up after the fighting stopped. The reinforcements look at you with expressions you can't quite interpret, something between respect and horror, seeing in your eyes and your blood-soaked uniforms the truth of combat, that they're terrified they'll experience themselves tomorrow or the next day. The field medic works on your leg, stitching a wound you don't remember receiving, his hands quick and practiced from treating hundreds of similar injuries. The local anesthetic barely works, your enhanced pain receptors picking up every tug of needle through flesh. But you don't complain because compared to what you've experienced today, this is nothing. This is just the body's way of reminding you that you're still alive to feel pain. They're bringing in the wounded now, or at least the wounded who survived long enough to be worth retrieving, carried on improvised stretchers or limping back under their own power. The ones too severely injured to move are being left in no man's land because Imperial Guard medical doctrine is brutally pragmatic about triage and resource allocation. You can hear some of them calling for help, their voices carrying across the darkness, growing weaker as shock and blood loss do their work. The commissar already made his rounds, administering Emperor's peace to those with unsurvivable wounds, but he missed some, or decided they were worth leaving to their fate, as object lessons in why you should avoid getting wounded. A guardsman you don't recognize stumbles past, his face slack with shock, his uniform soaked with someone else's blood. He's mumbling something, prayer or poetry, or just sounds that his damaged mind thinks should be words. The 1,000-meter stare of someone who saw too much and broke somewhere behind his eyes. The medic doesn't even look up, having already learned to recognize psychological casualties that aren't his problem, that will be someone else's responsibility to either rehabilitate or discharge or execute, depending on what command decides is most efficient. The casualty count comes in over Vox, announced with the emotional inflection of someone reading shipping manifests. Imperial losses: 6,247 killed in action, 3,891 wounded, 1,862 combat effective remaining. Tau losses: 187 killed, 94 wounded, 1,719 combat effective. The numbers are read aloud like they mean something, like there's significance in the statistical accounting of lives ended and bodies broken. But you understand now that the numbers are just numbers, that each one represents someone who woke up this morning with thoughts and fears and people who loved them, all reduced to data points in after-action reports. The mathematics are brutal. You lost 70% of your strength. The Tau lost less than 10% of theirs. By any rational measure, this was a catastrophic defeat, an engagement where the Imperial forces were decimated while barely scratching the enemy. But Imperial Guard doctrine doesn't measure victory and defeat the way rational military organizations do. You held your position. You stopped the Tau advance. Command will count this as a win because the alternative is admitting that your doctrine requires spending lives at rates that would bankrupt any force that couldn't replace losses by simply conscripting more warm bodies from a million worlds. Across the ruined industrial complex, in their own positions now pulled back to more defensible terrain, the Tau are conducting their own accounting. Fire warrior Shasla Tau Viola Shi sits with his remaining Bond brothers, their armor scored and damaged but still functional, their weapons depleted but resupplied from forward logistics that the Imperium can only dream of matching. His arm hurts where a guard knife slashed through his armor, the wound properly treated with medical supplies that include actual painkillers rather than just alcohol and prayer. 187 dead. For a Tau force, this is catastrophic, represents nearly 10% of their strength, losses that will take years to replace, because fire warriors aren't mass-produced conscripts, but trained professionals whose education and equipping requires significant resource investment. Each name is recorded, each family will receive personal notification from the commander, each loss mourned as an individual tragedy rather than a statistical inevitability. The greater good claims to value all life, and in moments like this that claim is tested against military necessity and found wanting but still acknowledged, Shi's first kill haunts him. The human whose chest he opened with pulse fire, who fell screaming in a language Shi doesn't speak, calling for someone who might have been a god or a mother, or just a name that meant something to the dying man but nothing to the soldier who killed him. The training covered killing in theory, explained the necessity of lethal force in advancing the greater good, but theory doesn't prepare you for the reality of watching someone die because you pulled a trigger, doesn't account for the way their eyes looked at you in that final moment, confused and afraid and somehow accusing. His Bond brother talks quietly about the close combat, the moment when human soldiers breached their position and fighting became intimate and terrifying. Tau doctrine emphasizes range and mobility specifically to avoid this scenario, recognizes that fire warriors are outmatched in melee combat against enemies who train for it, who seem to prefer it, who charge into certain death just to reach distances where their primitive weapons become effective. The humans who reached the Tau lines fought with a desperation that was almost admirable if it wasn't so horrifying. Bayonets and rifle butts and bare hands, accepting wounds that should have been disabling to inflict wounds in return. The greater good teaches that all sapient beings have value, that the Tau Empire's expansion is ultimately merciful because it liberates oppressed populations from brutal regimes like the Imperium. Shi believed this before today. Now he's trying to reconcile that belief with the memory of killing humans who were just following their orders the same way he follows his, who died bravely for a cause they believed in, even if that cause was objectively worse than the greater good. Is killing someone liberation if they never wanted to be liberated? Is imposing the greater good by force actually better than letting people remain in ignorance? These are philosophical questions that his training never adequately addressed, and tonight they're keeping him awake despite exhaustion that should render him unconscious. His commander walks the position, checking on warriors, offering quiet words of encouragement and tactical analysis. This is what Tau leadership looks like, officers who earned their rank through demonstrated competence rather than aristocratic birth, who understand that maintaining morale requires actually caring about the soldiers under their command. The contrast with Imperial Guard leadership structure, where officers are often nobility playing at warfare while enlisted men die, would be stark if anyone bothered to make the comparison. The commander stops at Shi's position, evaluates his wound, nods approval at proper treatment. "You fought well today," he says in the Fire Caste dialect. First combat is always difficult. The theory never quite matches the reality. Are they all like this? Shi asks, meaning the humans, meaning their willingness to die in mass charges, meaning the way they kept coming even after rational analysis would have suggested retreat. The commander considers the question with the thoughtfulness that military experience brings. The Imperials fight how their doctrine teaches them to fight. They have numerical superiority, and they use it, accepting casualty ratios that would be unthinkable for us because they can replace losses and we cannot. Their soldiers are brave. We should never mistake tactical inefficiency for cowardice. They charged into our fire because their commanders ordered it, and their culture has spent 10,000 years conditioning them to obey orders, even when those orders mean death. Is that better or worse than our way? She asks, then immediately regrets the question because it sounds like criticism of the greater good, which is technically heretical, even if practically everyone has doubts sometimes. But the commander doesn't reprimand him, just sits down beside him. Old warrior to young warrior, shared experience bridging rank. Different, he says finally. Not better or worse, just different. We value each warrior, invest heavily in training and equipment, accept that losing fire warriors is a strategic defeat even when we win tactical victories. They value masses of soldiers, invest minimally in training and equipment, accept that losing thousands is just the cost of holding positions. Our way preserves life but limits our expansion. Their way spends life like ammunition but allows them to hold 1,000,000 worlds. Neither is wrong. Both work within their respective contexts. She digests this, turning it over in his mind alongside the memories of today's killing. How do you keep doing this? He asks quietly. Knowing that you're going to kill more people tomorrow. Knowing that they're brave and following orders and probably believe in their cause as much as we believe in ours. The commander is quiet for a long moment, and when he speaks his voice carries the weight of decades of warfare. You tell yourself that the greater good requires it, that the galaxy will be better when the Imperium finally falls and its oppressed populations are liberated. That every human you kill today is one who won't perpetuate their brutal system tomorrow. You tell yourself these things, and you believe them because believing is easier than confronting the alternative. And if you stop believing, she whispers, then you complete your contract and retire, the commander says. That's what happens when the cognitive dissonance becomes unbearable. You serve your time with honor and then you find something else to do with your life. Something that doesn't require killing people to advance philosophical principles. There's no shame in it. The greater good needs farmers and engineers as much as it needs warriors. This is heresy by imperial standards, this acknowledgement that soldiers might have moral doubts, might question their service, might choose to stop fighting without being executed as cowards. The Tau Empire isn't perfect, has its own rigidities and hierarchies and dark corners that official doctrine never discusses, but it's functionally different enough from the Imperium that comparison becomes almost impossible. Back in the imperial position, you're trying to sleep despite the cold and the pain and the memories that replay behind your closed eyes every time you stop actively thinking about something else. The man next to you is weeping quietly, not from physical pain but from whatever he saw or did today that broke something in his psyche. His quiet sobs, a sound that's becoming familiar in the hours after battle. Someone is praying, their voice hoarse from screaming during combat, reciting litanies to an emperor who hasn't answered prayers in 10,000 years, but remains the only source of hope for soldiers who have nothing else. The commissar walks past, his presence making everyone stiffen to attention despite exhaustion, his bolt pistol visible on his hip as reminder of what happens to those who fail to maintain discipline. He stops near the praying man, listens for a moment, then nods approval and moves on, satisfied that this at least is proper faith rather than weakness that needs purging. The imperial system runs on faith and fear in roughly equal measure. Faith to inspire charging into fire and fear to prevent retreat when faith proves insufficient. Tomorrow the killing will resume. The Tau will probe the lines, seeking weak points, applying their doctrine of precision targeting and force multiplication. The Imperial Guard will hold through mass and stubbornness, accepting casualties that would break any reasonable military because the Astra Militarum stopped being reasonable 10,000 years ago and learned that unreasonable tactics work when you have effectively infinite manpower to draw upon. More soldiers will die, more names will be added to casualty lists, more bodies will decompose in no man's land until the war moves elsewhere and local scavengers can reclaim the biomass. This pattern repeats across the galaxy, on 10,000 worlds, in 1,000,000 engagements, an endless grinding of flesh against faith, against technology, against ideology. The Imperium fights the Tau, fights the Orcs, fights the Tyranids, fights. Chaos fights itself in a recursive cycle of violence that serves no ultimate purpose except the continuation of violence. There are no good guys in the grim darkness of the far future, just different flavors of awful and different philosophical justifications for atrocity. You're 19 years old, and you've killed people today. Not shot at targets during training, but murdered sapient beings who had names and families and dreams, ended their existence with bayonet and lasgun because commanders you never met decided this position needed holding, and your life was the currency to purchase that objective. Tomorrow, you'll probably do it again, if you survive long enough to face another enemy, and the day after that, and the day after that, until eventually the mathematics catch up with you, and your name becomes another statistic in the casualty reports. The Emperor protects, the greater good uplifts. Both are lies that soldiers tell themselves to make the killing bearable. justifications for violence that help you sleep at night, assuming sleep comes at all. The truth is simpler and more terrible. You kill because you're ordered to kill. You die because tactics and technology and luck conspire against you. And your individual existence matters to precisely no one, except the people who loved you, and they'll never know the details of how you died or why, because the Imperium doesn't waste resources on detailed casualty notifications. Welcome to Infantry War in the 41st Millennium. This is the reality. This is what happens when doctrines collide and ideologies demand blood sacrifice. This is the ground truth that propaganda never shows and recruiting speeches never mention. You're not a hero, you're not a warrior, you're not the Emperor's finest. You're a soldier, which means you're a tool, which means you're disposable, which means your value is measured in tactical objectives, achieved per casualty inflicted, and nothing more. The night is cold. The dawn will bring heat and death in equal measure. You'll face it because you have no choice, because desertion means execution and surrender means the same thing, because forward is the only direction the Imperial Guard knows and holding is the only victory it understands. This is your life. Now, however long it lasts,